Shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. With St. Patrick's Day just around the corner, it feels like a great time to take a look at the Celt's unique unit, the Woad Raider. This unit has actually gotten quite a bit of love over the last few years. Between the introduction of supplies and gambizins in Definitive Edition, the infantry unique units collectively lost some of their edge over the champion line, meaning many, including Woad Raiders, were subsequently buffed. This included the non-elite version's attack increasing from 8 to 11, its elite version attack increasing by 1, and the HP of both going up by 5 over the last couple of years. Where exactly that leaves them now compared to the Celt Swordsman line is the main focus in this video, on top of just a general look at the Woad Raider in some depth. To start simply side by side with the Longsword in Castle Age, we should know right off the bat the Woad Raider is a more expensive unit at 65 food and 25 gold. Celts then get supplies, meaning the Longsword is almost 30% cheaper by total resources with that tech. For that extra cost, Woad Raiders are a mixed bag, giving you 2 extra attack and 10 more HP, but 1 less of each type of armor after gambizins. At a glance, the stats suggest Woad Raiders are maybe a little stronger, but the main thing you're paying for is that the Woad Raider moves 34% faster than even a Celt Longsword, which itself, remember, already has 1.5 times the usual effective squires from the Civ bonus. It's a very similar comparison in Imperial Age as well, with the elite version having an attack, HP, and speed advantage, but the champion having an extra of each type of armor. To put their speed into perspective, the only faster infantry is an elite Eagle Warrior with squires, and a Woad Raider can even outrun a knight without husbandry, or a non-elite Eagle Warrior. Now, you may have noticed they look a little odd, power walking faster than many units that are flat out running. It turns out there's a bit of a story behind that, which is that back in Age of Kings, the Woad Raider was a much slower unit, roughly splitting the difference between champions and knights. It wasn't until Age of Conquerors that they were massively sped up to what they are today. Either way, that speed immediately makes them a dangerous raiding unit, as the name implies, being roughly on par with many cavalry units in terms of speed, which is notable given they don't have the same weaknesses to spears and camels. Another hidden attribute is they deal a bit of bonus damage against buildings, unlike most cavalry. It's just +2 in Castle Age, growing to +3 when elite, means they're surprisingly good at tearing through house walls or eating TCs, about 25% better at that than knights, for example. Their other hidden bonus is +2, growing to +3 against eagles. This is much lower than the Long Swordsman +6 or Two-Handed Swordsman +8, but it still helps in that matchup. In terms of upgrades, there really aren't any big surprises here. Supplies and gambizins don't affect them, and Celts lack squires for pretty obvious reasons. With another 10% speed boost, Woad Raiders would be almost as fast as a Hussar with husbandry. A final point is while they do need a castle to train, they're actually created in a very quick 10 seconds compared to a Longsword's 21 or Pikeman's 22. So with even a handful of castles, they're actually pretty easy to mass up, especially if you're combining them with a second unit like pikemen or crossbows and are just sprinkling them in. So that's an overview of the unit, where their main gimmick is very clearly their speed. They're basically a slightly more expensive, faster version of the militia line, implying they should be good at many of the same roles, being anti-trash, anti-eagle, and anti-building, with their faster movement giving some raiding and a bit of an anti-archer quality on paper as well. The most interesting question to me at this point though is, speed aside, are they strictly better from a value perspective than the champion line, or are you giving up some cost efficiency? Of course, they're not just more expensive, but are also lacking a bit of armor, and it isn't immediately obvious if their extra attack and HP fully offset that. To answer this question, let's check them out in a few different matchups, starting in the Castle Age. As you'd probably expect, just having them up against an equal number of Celt Longswords, the Woad Raider is the more population-efficient unit, winning that fight fairly easily. Of course, Woad Raiders cost more, so that's not saying too much. If we balance things out by total resources spent, notice the Woad Raiders still win, though the fight is getting closer. Also, as just a quick note, I personally love how after the battle, they all huddle together and talk about their glorious victory, but kick these 2 guys out in particular to go off and do their own thing. Now this fight is getting close enough that a decent infantry bonus could change the story. Japanese faster attacking longswords, for example, can actually win, while also being much less cliquey in their post-fight huddle. So far, I should point out this is without supplies, as not every Civ gets that. If we throw in supplies, even generic longswords will start to beat an equal value of Woad Raiders. This means that despite being slower and less pop efficient, the swordsman line still has a place as a more cost-efficient alternative in melee fights for the long run, so you are giving up some value for the Woad Raider's speed, which seems fair. To put Woad Raiders in a wider context against a variety of other unique Castle Age infantry, they actually come out roughly average, winning against the anti-archer infantry like Huskarls and Ghulams, but aren't a match for the tougher ones like Berserks or Sergeants. Finishing up our look at infantry, against Eagles they of course do very well, while also being able to chase them down. Even with a smaller bonus here than Longswords, this is a case where their faster speed makes them arguably the better choice against Eagles than Longswords with even the Celt speed bonus. So far, Woad Raiders are holding their own in melee, but now let's see if they're good enough to take on Knights. The answer, of course, is no, and even with a numbers advantage reflecting the difference in cost, Knights still come out on top with a slight edge. For that reason, a lot of players will mix in Pikemen alongside their Woad Raiders, especially against civs with above average Knights or against Elephants, as a pure Woad Raider army will generally lose otherwise. On the other hand, against weaker cavalry units like Camels, even Saracens aren't a match for Woad Raiders. That's a big point, as you start to notice you have the speed of Knights available to you, but without the hard counter from anti-cavalry units, though this is another case where mixing in a few pikes with your Woad Raiders wouldn't hurt. So that's cavalry, but now let's take a look at what should be one of the Woad Raiders' specialties, that is, as an anti-trash generalist, similar to the swordsman line. Right away, as you'd expect, pikemen are just absolutely destroyed. Celts don't have the best cavalry, but Woad Raiders are a nice backup unit to support any Knights that you do make. And in this case, with equal resources and outnumbered 18 to 12, they lost no units, while ending with nearly 3/4 of their HP left. As for the elite skirmisher, this is a bit trickier one. Prior to Gambazins, Woad Raiders would have been a strict upgrade, taking 35 javelins instead of 30 while having their extra speed. With Gambazins though, fully upgraded longswords can now take 60 shots, so it's a lot more debatable. This is a unit you run into reasonably often with Celts, where many civilizations will go for a combo of Knights and Skirmishers, and an army of Celt pikes plus a few Woad Raiders gives you a unit that can not just tank a few shots, but quickly get into skirmisher lines and mess with their minimum range. Of course, Celts also have good siege to deal with skirmishers as well. Now, the one trash unit Woad Raiders can struggle a bit more against is light cavalry. They do technically win with equal resources, but a few pikes or crossbows thrown into support would go a long way in helping out here. But speaking of crossbows, that brings us to the question of whether Woad Raiders are decent against archers. Longswords with Gambazins looked much better against skirmishers because that one pierce armor cut the damage taken in half, but in the case of crossbows, longswords only take 2 more shots in total. Crossbows can be almost untouchable with a critical mass, but out in the open with equal numbers, the Woad Raiders do pretty well for infantry, and much better than longswords, as the crossbows are just constantly taking damage. In this case, even with micro, it was still a roughly balanced fight. Where that speed advantage is even more helpful though is with cavalry archers. They're only slightly faster than Woad Raiders, and with their long attack delay, you can't really hit and run effectively, even with husbandry. It feels like every time you stop to fire, you take free hits from Woad Raiders, and at the least, they're unusually annoying for infantry. And finally, to touch on a couple of miscellaneous units, again, speed is obviously helpful against siege, though mass scorpions are probably still a solid threat to Woad Raiders in a choke point, depending on numbers. I always like to point out an inherent advantage infantry unique units give as well when defending castles against rams, since infantry are created quickly and deal pretty good melee damage. Next though, we should talk about what, if anything, changes about all these dynamics in the Imperial Age as more upgrades come in. To start with the Elite upgrade, it's relatively expensive at 1000 food and 800 gold, adding more HP, attack, and enhancing their bonus damage slightly. In contrast, upgrading all the way to Champion is more food in total, but less gold, obviously involving a number of steps and being a longer transition to make. To start off doing a similar direct comparison as before against the Celt Swordsman line, now in Imperial Age, with equal resources and no supplies, Elite Woad Raiders dominate, ending with 40% of their HP left. Of course, like Castle Age, that dynamic flips if we throw in supplies and rebalance, but it's not that one-sided, with champions only slightly better here. It seems in Imperial Age, you're not giving up as much value in melee fights by going Elite Woad Raider over champions. In fact, Woad Raiders start to look like a solid all-around melee unit in Imperial, beating generic Cavaliers cost-effectively, showing even without flashing their speed, they have some decent stats, especially for infantry, with relatively high attack and HP. That said, they still get trounced by Paladins. Paladin is an expensive upgrade, but in a team game situation where someone has it, going full Elite Woad Raider against them is probably not a winning play. That's also true to an extent for Celt champions, even with supplies, though the fight is closer in that case. Getting back to what Woad Raiders excel at though, maybe even more so than in Castle Age, this is where being anti-trash comes into play. Again, they dominate halberdiers even when heavily outnumbered, though that is common for most infantry unique units. They also take a decent number of shots from skirmishers as well. Champions with gambesons are still better at that on paper, but once you factor in speed, I'd actually prefer using Woad Raiders here myself. Maybe most notable is they start to match up fairly well against Hussar, whereas in Castle Age, the light cavalry line was more of a balanced trade. Considering the Woad Raiders' speed lets them keep up with those much more easily than halberdiers or champions, they may even be your best defensive response to someone spamming Hussar into your economy, though using your faster moving halberdiers as Celts is also a reasonable choice as well. Against ranged units, again, Woad Raiders take basically the same number of shots as a champion with gambesons, and are just faster and better at dealing with archers all around. They also take the same number of shots from hand cannoneers, so there's no reason to prefer champions in any of those sorts of matchups. Putting all this together within the greater context of Celts as well, I alluded to it in passing a few times, but Woad Raiders are a very nice option to combine with other Celt units. They go well with crossbows or pikes to protect against skirmishers, they work well supporting knights as protection against enemy pikemen without slowing your army down, and also combine well with siege to help snipe enemy mangonels or deter enemy cavalry, which can't run around them as easily as they can around spears. As we've seen though, even on their own, they're solid against trash units, give a bit of a threat to buildings, are fast enough to be annoying in an enemy economy, and are pretty cheap and easy to make to top it off. That said, I don't think they fully replace the swordsman line, which after supplies can give theoretically better long-term value in those grinding melee fights, or when engaging eagles in particular head-on. Altogether, that versatility makes Woad Raiders a key piece in many of the Celts' army compositions. How well they work as that key piece actually reminds me a lot of my newest side hustle online business, Spirit of the Jigsaw, selling novelty puzzles. It even has a great website thanks to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is a website builder giving anyone the tools to easily create a site within minutes, using pre-made templates from which you can then customize every detail to suit your idea. Whether you're a blogger, small business owner hoping to show up in online search results, or looking to create an online store for some passive income, selling physical, digital, or service goods, Squarespace helps you get started with a professional-looking website. They then have great third-party extensions to handle things like inventory, taxes, shipping, and scheduling to accommodate your specific needs. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, where you can then pick a template and domain name to get started. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/spiritofthelaw to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So that's a look at the Woad Raider. At the least, I hope the takeaway is despite the name, they're a lot more than just a raiding unit. In fact, maybe instead of Woad Raiders, they should have been called Woad Raiders, as if anything their specialty is grinding through enemy trash units. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys. I'll see you next time.